Welcome to the Better Buildings, Better Society podcast. Twice a month, we interview interesting individuals and get insight into what they think makes building better members of society. Subscribe to our podcast and share with your friends. Hi, I'm Stephen Forster, founder and principal of DMA Engineering. My passion lies in the built environment and in the mechanical systems that keep buildings running at their optimum efficiency, while at the same time provide the best possible health and comfort to their occupants. In this way, DMA is absolutely committed to making buildings better members of society. This podcast focuses on energy efficiency through the eyes and experience of building industry professionals. Together with my guest, I will lead all of us on an exploration of how to build better energy efficiency buildings, how to save our clients time and money, and offer practical advice for those interested in the built environment. Join me, a mechanical engineer, outdoor enthusiast, and green advocate as I interview guests with leading edge ideas for creating better buildings and a better society. Hello again, I'm Stephen Forster, Principal Engineer of DMA Engineering. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Better Buildings, Better Society podcast. This week we have Jason Knoll, founder of Being Imaginal, located in Boulder, Colorado. Being Imaginal offers life and executive coaching, business consulting, strategic planning, and change management, team building, among many other services. Jason offers a unique combination of visionary insight and grounded skill. He is a versatile business leader with a proven career focus on inspiring the conditions to help transform and guide individuals and organizations to greater heights and awareness. We are excited to be hosting Jason and thrilled to explore more about how conscious-centered design can specifically make the built environment better members of society. With that, it is our privilege to welcome Jason to the show and learn more about what inspires him in this industry. So, how are you doing today, Jason?
Good morning, Stephen. Doing very well, thank you. How about you?
Doing pretty good.
It's a beautiful day here in Colorado.
It is a nice fall day. So, just give us a little bit of background about yourself, what what conscious-centered design framework means to you. I know you and I have worked together on regenerative business practices. So if you can kind of get a little bit more into what all that means and what it's all about, that'd be great.
Sure. I guess in the broadest sense, I like to think of myself working in the space of human potential in transformation and service to creating a more regenerative, resilient, and equitable world. I believe that as humans, we have incredible untapped potential, and that when we find the way to tap into that potential, we're going to bring forth, solutions to the challenges we face that are, perhaps seemingly out of reach at the moment. That our potential, our creativity can bring forth innovation and in technology, in process, in ways of living that will serve to help us experience the world in a different way.
All right, very good. There's a lot there to unpack, I guess. So, I think one thing that's out there these days is regenerative, right? Regenerative seems to be the buzzword that everybody's talking about. And I know when you and I first started talking several years ago, 3-4 years ago, nobody was talking about regenerative, right? So now it's all seems like the bandwagon that people seem to jump on. If you can just give a little bit more background on the regenerative, what regenerative truly means as you see it, and what does that actually mean for this how we get to our true potential and where maybe, right, regenerative, we're not supposed to talk like about machines, right? Things, we're not fine oiled machines is not the language we want to be using. We want to be thinking about how can we let something grow, die, go through a certain natural process in its natural way. And I guess being somewhat harmony with people, society and nature all mixed into one. So I guess if you can expand upon my ramble a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, you are correct. Regenerative has certainly come forth in the last couple of years as the new buzzword, the new sustainability, I had hoped some years ago that it would not get to necessarily that point of where there's potentially a lot of greenwashing, where a lot of people are throwing the word around, but I do believe that we are already there. However, for me, regenerative means that we are really tapping more into living systems. Everything really is life. And if we're going to survive as a human species, if we're going to thrive as a human species and live on a healthy planet, then we've got to come into alignment with life itself. You mentioned the machine paradigm, and we've very much lived in a machine paradigm where we even refer to ourselves sometimes as cogs in the wheel. Our language is very much aligned with machine everything, right? We see things in machine language almost. And in many ways, technology has taken over as the solution. Whether it's, let's build, multi-billion-dollar machines to suck carbon out of the air, which I'm not saying is necessarily a bad thing, but it's not the solution. The solution to taking carbon out of the air is to put it into the soil where it belongs, right? And nature can do that in a way that is far beyond what technology by itself certainly can do. That doesn't mean that technology isn't an important component. I think if we have technology that is truly supporting living systems and supporting life, then it can really add value. If we have technology in place of nature, if we think that technology will help us dominate nature or have control over nature or trick or fool nature, we're going to end up, continuing down the same path that we're on, which is unsustainable.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, there's a fair bit there. I mean, it's always nuanced and complicated,
Yes.
as most of these conversations are. And it really comes down to like externalities, right? That was the very first time that people really started talking about this. What's the true externalities of doing a process or something, and how do you capture that if you're only looking at it from the first capital expense, and then maybe the operating expense of that piece of whatever you're doing, but you're ignoring all the externalities of it, bad air quality, of all those other things. It's there, and I think it's really it comes down to how do we actually understand the externalities, and what does that actually look like in a process or a system. And I think that's kind of where the regenerative framework is kind of trying to make that more. You got to consider all that stuff when you're thinking about it, right? What is that? What is the whole process of doing things?
Right. The regenerative approach is going to take a holistic approach, a living systems approach, where you do consider all of these things. We've talked about externalities for many years, many times, in terms of how we capture the costs of externalities and the P&Ls and the balance sheets. And I don't see that necessarily going anywhere. Nobody's really taken or come up with an approach to really quantify that. And perhaps that's not the right approach. The right approach is to really take, as you said, take this into account as we plan something, as we design something. If we're looking in the built environment, how do we take a holistic approach to that project? How do we consider the community in which that project is being built, the land base that project is being built upon, and then bringing all of the components of that project, from its conceptualization to design to all of the technology to every aspect of that, into one holistic view, so that we can have a final project that really exists in harmony with life and with nature itself.
Yeah. So with all that being said, right, with all that work you're doing, I know you're doing a fair bit of work with the Savory Institute through coaching, individual businesses and individuals such as myself. So, I mean, what's the greatest challenge you see with the work you're doing in the next 3, 5, and 10 years, or some time horizon? What do you think's the what are the challenges that you've seen? And I think we can even talk a little bit about the challenges we just came through with COVID, right? I mean, there's these all these things that have brought things together, and how that regenerative has become, it's out of, as we came out of COVID, right? Regenerative became the word, right? And so it's like, where do we see that going? And like, we didn't want it to be a mainstream greenwash word in the beginning, but I mean, obviously now that there's some awareness to it, and we wanted people to be looking at this, how do we get the conversation in boardrooms? And I know you are having some of those conversations in boardrooms with the work at the Savory Institute. So I think, what does it look like going forward, do you think?
Well, I've been sitting with this question of where are we going? And what I'm sitting with right now is that I feel that we, as humanity, we are kind of in a crisis of separation, right? We see ourselves as separate from each other. We see each other as separate from nature. And quite honestly, we are separate from who we really are as human beings. We are consumed with beliefs and patterns and fears and all the things that keep us from tapping into who we truly are, as an individual, and our potential. And I think that's really the greatest challenge: is how do we come back into an understanding of who we are as an individual, and how we are interconnected with and interdependent with each other and with nature. And once we really come into that, or return to a sense of connectedness, that's when I believe that we'll start working together to build strong communities. We'll find solutions together, and we will find ways of coming back into harmony with nature, so that we can truly begin to reverse the impacts of climate change.
So do you think, when you think of that, and you think of how this, right now, if we just think a little bit about, the country that everybody says it's so divided, right? I mean, there's all this talk about how divided we are. And do you think it comes down to a state of more, tribalism, where you'll see people that more pockets that adopt this way of doing communities, and then there'll be communities that won't? Or what? I think in a grand scheme of things, it'd be a world thing, but where do you see it happening in the immediate future? Do you think it's going to be little pockets of tribalism, or do you think it's going to, where's that all headed?
I think in the near term, we're going to see more tribalism. We're going to see more separation. Unfortunately, I think it will take us some time to realize that we aren't going to survive as a species living like this. Community is a critically important aspect of what supports us in living a good life. However, that sense of community has to support life and support everybody being able to thrive. So how do we do that? One of the things that I've been aware of for a long time, and I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people over the years about this. You and I have probably talked about this as well at one point. Is that if we sat, a group of a dozen people in a room, in some local community or county or something here in Colorado, and we did one in Kansas, and we did one in 50, different places across the country. And in that dozen people would be people who identify as this political party or that political party, or this belief system or that belief system. And we ask them to describe what is most important to them. What do they care about most in life? I believe, and what I've gleaned from my conversations with people, is that it's all the same thing. Humans all want to have, feel love in their lives. They want to have some experience of joy or satisfaction. They want to feel safe. They want some sense of belonging. feeling valued in the world. And maybe there's a few iterations or a few different words that can describe the same thing, but it's all going to come down, in my view, to the same handful of things that we all desire to experience in our lives. It's really a matter of how do we see that coming into play. If you believe in alignment with this paradigm, you think that what creates safety in your life is one thing. If you align with this other group over here, well, safety may look like something else. But we have to come together in a place where we agree as a community that this is the quality of life, and find ways of creating that quality of life for everybody in the community in a way that is shared, that we can all work towards together. And until we come to that place, the tribalism will continue to create greater separation and lead to breakdowns in community.
Yeah, I agree. I think, to the built environment, the codes are driving a lot of people to build certain ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely see that happening. So you're kind of already, if you choose to live in a certain county, you're some county or city, right? You're signing up to be part of a certain tribe that's going to make certain building requirements happen, and that's just so you're kind of self-selected to be part of a tribe with the building code. But that's mandated, right? That's a mandated thing to do in the built environment. Whereas, it just is, agriculturally, where the regenerative has a big foothold in that world, it's different, right? That on how there's no real code to mandate that you have to do this. It's a kind of still a free for all in that world on how things are done. That whole thing has that whole ecosystem. What do you see the changes that can be made there, not by code, right? How do you see that we can get that to change?
Wow, that's a loaded question. In some ways, you're right in that right now, in at least in this country, there aren't a lot of codes, perhaps around agriculture, and I'm not close enough to the on the ground agricultural practices. Maybe somebody who's actually a farmer would come back and say, Jason, there are all kinds of rules and regulations I've got to follow that I'm not aware of. So I'll beg forgiveness, in my naivete around what rules and regulations may actually be in place. But there's certainly no mandate that I'm aware of, certainly in this country, from a policy or regulation standpoint, that is driving regenerative agriculture. I think that having policy in that area would be very helpful. But policy, as we know, and mandates are effective in many ways, but they don't necessarily get people on board. So we have to find a way to bring those two things together. I know in Europe, there are codes being put into place, policies being put into place in certain countries that are actually mandating the reduction of animals on the land. This is completely counter to actually what will serve the land. So we have to be very careful as we really look at how do we develop policy, how do we develop codes and these kinds of things to truly create the intended outcomes that we desire, rather than putting something into place based upon, say, political pressure or different belief systems that actually will result in unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's interesting to mandate something. So I was just in Rifle doing some rock climbing not too long ago, and I was staying in Glenwood Springs and commuting in, and you drive along, and there's this sheep farmer there between Newcastle and the Rifle City Park, and there's a sheep farmer there raising his sheep. Maybe somebody that drives by there will know the place I'm talking about, where they just eating the grass down to a nub, right? It's all brown grass, and there's these sheep walking around trying to eat anything that's green at this point, and you're just like, well, you don't have to be a rocket surgeon to see that isn't that's not what you want to do, right? Because the erosion's going to happen, right? I mean, just if there's nothing to hold anything, it's just going to be there. Why they let the sheep just eat it down to nothing is just plain laziness, in my opinion, and not, just move the sheep. I guess it's too much effort to move the sheep around from one field to another, and not let them eat down so far, but how detrimental it is. It's just pretty basic stuff to see. And again, I'm not a farmer or anything, but I understand that bare ground stuff's going to erode away. We're getting ready to head out to Kentucky to do some climbing, and we're going to be driving through Kansas, and I'm sure I'm going to see a lot of bare brown fields. It doesn't take a lot to understand that, that if there's nothing there, if there's nothing growing on it, it's going to get tore up, right? I mean, so the wind's going to come by and take a layer off of it, and if it's brown, there's nothing growing there, and it should be growing. So
right. Yeah. Bare ground is one of the leading causes of climate change in many ways. Bare ground is what causes drought. Drought does not cause bare ground. So putting animals on the land and managing them properly is the key. In the Savory Institute's methodology, the holistic framework, it is context-based to a particular piece of land, but the animals are managed from one pasture to the next based upon the specific grasses and how they're growing in that particular pasture. You want the animals to only eat the grass down to a certain point where they're nourished and they're fed, but they're not eating down to the root. They're not pulling the root out. They're not eating it down too far. And then you want to move them on to the next pasture and not have them return to that pasture until the grasses have regenerated or regrown to a certain length or a certain height, to where that root system continues to grow and strengthen and create biodiversity in the soil. That's what attracts the butterflies to come back. It's what brings the birds back. There's a whole process that happens when you are managing properly within the context. Yeah, to have cattle or sheep or any animal on one piece of land where they're able to basically decimate the grass or whatever is there, that's not in service. It's as many people are beginning to say around the grazing world, it's not the cow, it's the how.
So I'm gonna take a leap here. I'm gonna make a segue. So we're talking about, so I'm gonna go from the cow mammal to the Homo sapien mammal, and how what we just talked about in managing, how grazing happens and how just how that happens, right? And how we look at that in the regenerative framework, and how that. So now let's bring that back. How you go about coaching, the Homo sapien, and how we take that exact same ideals and bring it in just to a coaching world. What's your process in making that all happen?
Well, Stephen, as you know, we talked some years ago about what is the healthy soil of our lives. What is the healthy soil of an organization or a community? In agriculture, it's about healthy soil, right? Healthy soil retains water. It results in clean water, clean air. It sequesters carbon. The biodiversity provides nutrient-dense food. The benefits of healthy soil in an agricultural sense go on and on and on. I mean, there are many people, and I subscribe to this, is that healthy soil is what's going to help save the world. If we take that into the context of our lives, what is the healthy soil? What's that equivalent of healthy soil in my life that I can build that's going to allow for kind of a consistent experience of resiliency, of abundance, rather than going at trying to solve this problem in a reductionist mode or instant gratification, around something, how do we step back and how do we build the healthy soil, those structures, those processes, the systems in our lives and our organizations that allow the outcomes that we want to be more naturally occurring outcomes, the way good harvest would be a naturally occurring outcome of healthy soil.
So when we're thinking of healthy soil within an organization, right? I mean, healthy soil in agriculture can definitely be there. What does healthy soil really look like within an organization? What does it feel like when it's live and thriving within an organization?
Yeah. For me, when we have healthy soil in an organization, it means that all the pieces and parts, first of all, are working together. But it really starts in consciousness, in our belief system, in really being able to have the awareness that we are connected to each other, we're connected to nature, we're connected to everything. So how do we really come first of all to that? How do we understand the genius, the individual genius of each person on the team within an organization? How do we nurture that? How do we develop it? There's a saying of getting the right butts in the right seats. How do we get the right people in the right roles and doing the right things to where they have the opportunity to bring forth their unique brilliance, their genius, in a way that they're seen and they're valued and they're included because they have something to bring to the team. They have something to bring to the solutions that are being designed and created. So how do we maximize that? How do we bring forth a common and shared understanding or context? And then from there, how do we really look at the structures within an organization that support that health? How do we communicate with each other effectively? How do we put in the right decision-making processes? How do we share information? How do we, quite honestly, get to the point where we let things die when they need to die? Sometimes I think one of the greatest challenges that I've seen in businesses is continuing to try and do the same thing when it doesn't work. Sometimes things just need to die, and from the decay of that, we can build again sort of that the nutrients and use those nutrients, if you will, to allow something new to be born. Maybe what's not working just needs to go away, and once that is out of the way, now that brilliance that's within the organization, within the team, can bring forth, the next iteration or an evolution, or a new way of providing a service or bringing a product into the marketplace or whatever it is that the organization is doing. So that, again, that's all a process of that healthy soil of understanding that, things change, things evolve over time. And just because we've done it this way, for the last X number of years doesn't mean that that's going to continue to work in the world as it stands today.
One of the things that you told me once was that something can't grow where something else is planted. Really, from all aspects of a business, I think that pertains, right? I mean, it comes down to where you're focused, what project types you're focused, what client types you're focused on. Because if you're working on one thing and you want to be working somewhere else, you can't, right? Because you're planted in one direction. If you want to be in a different area, it's hard to move over cast the vine, if you will, to a new area. There has to be a place for that to grow. And I think that is one thing that is key, is to making sure that an organization has all the places in, their focus. Their focus is key. You know what I mean? They're growing where they want to grow, in the areas they want to grow. I think it's a good statement to have all the way around. I mean, when I think about that statement, there's a lot of areas that it pertains, and you can apply it, and it still makes sense, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely correct in that when an organization has tried to be in too many places or has planted itself in a particular area that is really not aligned to, let's call it, the organizational genius, right? Then what could grow what could really thrive doesn't have the opportunity to really thrive because you've planted your field, so to speak, with things that just aren't aligned to that genius.
Yeah, for sure. When you say consciousness centered design, so is that like be present, strip a layer off that, if you will? And what are we saying when we're saying consciousness centered design? What are you digging into there?
Right. Well, consciousness in the quantum sense is really the source of all creation. Right? All of our creation begins in consciousness. So that's kind of the baseline, right? That we do live in a quantum world. So if we look at it from that standpoint, it is starting with, where is my consciousness? What are the belief systems that I'm holding? Am I sitting in a belief that I'm separate from everything? Let's just take that, as step one. Am I separate from the people around me? Am I separate from the world? Or is my consciousness in a place where I understand that I am deeply interconnected? That shift in itself will change your entire approach to life, right? So, and then there are beliefs that we hold about ourselves. Whether that's imposter syndrome and all of the things that go with how we view ourselves and our potential in the world, and how do we really begin to identify those kinds of limiting beliefs and those things that are holding us back from really showing up as who we are. Because again, I truly believe that we all have a brilliance, we all have a genius. If we're alive in a body today, we have something to contribute to the world right now. So let's strip away the things that are keeping us from showing up in that way. That's really, for me, the beginning point of it. From there, it is then, how can I authentically show up in that? How do I show up in the world is in my brilliance, and how do I bring the things together in my life to create alignment in my life? And then from that point, how do I step into action that matters? And how do I then ultimately create or accept accountability for what I've created in my life? If I don't like, from a very personal standpoint, if I don't like the experience that I'm having, the first question I ask myself is, how did I participate in the creation of this experience? And then how do I take that wisdom, if you will, that I've gained from the experience and take that back into the next cycle of creation, so that I'm not just creating the same crap over and over and over.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, and I mean, just to the built environment, right? We see things happen. People design projects with an intention. They start out with an intention, and then that intention can get, again, back to the VE of sustainable parts of it, right? But if it's a stated goal and it's a goal that has to be met, you can forego certain things of the project. And one of the things that we always struggle with is, why not just take 1,000 square feet out of the house and keep all the sustainable parts of it, and have, what I mean? How can we, take 1,000 square feet out and still meet the budget by just knocking off 1,000 square feet? And what does that look like? And so that's always a struggle we have, where people don't want to do certain things like that on projects that we work on. And then again, it comes down to a consciousness of, hey, you got different things trying to compete. How do you make it all line up at the end of the day and achieve the same outcome?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to the built environment, one of the things that I've heard in working with a number of people in the built environment over the years is that, one of the greatest breakdowns oftentimes can be communication and coordination between all of the players, right? You've got the owner, you've got the developer, you've got an architect, you've got all the different engineering aspects, you've got the contractors, and a lot of times, the conflicts that arise in communication and coordination and understanding between those different parties, right? So if I were to say, what would I suggest? is like for every project, and I think you and I have probably talked about this before, and maybe it's not the easiest thing, but maybe it's worth the investment at the beginning of any given project to sit down with all of those players, all the people who are the stakeholders in that project, and come up with a shared context, of what is this project really, what do we really want this project to represent? What is the purpose of this project? And then how do we, work together in that shared understanding, to create the structures for communication and all of these other things so that, things flow more seamlessly. Now, if you've got that framework, if you've got that structure in place, when something comes along that starts to break the budget, it doesn't come down to finger pointing, or it doesn't come down to having to start to exclude things that are really core to the purpose of the project. But it's a joint conversation from, again, going back to all those stakeholders. We've got a budget problem here. How are we going to come together to solve this in context of the purpose of the project and the desired outcomes of this project?
Right. And it's the holistic, having that holistic all stakeholder buy-in, right? That's kind of, you would think it's key, right, to a project. You think it happens on every project, it doesn't, right? It's so a lot of things are very disjointed in how things go about. The built environment, how we build things is definitely, it's an interesting market to be in, and how things actually get built, how we're trying to bring certain things to life within it. Just not only how the design, right, the design, but actually how it's constructed. And there's a lot of different things going on in that within the industry, right? From off-site construction, on-site construction, materials, carbon, all these other things that are there that come into a project. And typically, almost every building is a one-off. So it's a very interesting market that we do. So, you've worked with a lot of folks in the built environment in your consulting and coaching practice.
Worked with a few, and through that, then been involved in a number of different conversations. I'm not involved in this particular project, but I spent some time in Denmark this past summer and was introduced to a project over there, an organization called Home.Earth. Fascinating example of regenerative built environment where Denmark's a very different place than the United States in many ways, right? But this is Home.Earth is a company that is building multifamily communities, and from the design of the building itself, they are understanding from the layout, the size, all the materials, how to minimize carbon footprint that is in the carbon embedded in the project itself. Every material is going to be able to be recycled or is an upcycled material. So they're looking at an entire life cycle of the materials going into it. They're looking at how does that serve the community that's going to live there. So now within their, like, say, holistic context, they are looking at how does the community who lives here interact with each other. They're seeking, say, intergenerational people who are living there, from the elders to, having children there, so that there's a thriving community that can learn from each other, that can grow together, that can support each other in a lot of different ways. So they're taking this incredible holistic approach to it, which I think is very important, because for me, when we talk about the built environment, we cannot separate that from the idea of community, right? Our home, whether it's a single family home, it's still community. We have our family there. We have our friends. We have our people come, into our home. And so it's a place for sharing community. If it's a multifamily project, there's community that's living there. And even in an office building or a commercial building, you have people who are working there who are interacting with each other. So there's still community. So how do we do we bring a sense of community into the whole context of the built environment, and how that community can thrive and be supported by the structure that is around them.
And I think so. Kind of a little bit about how we started with the regenerative theme and how we brought it up a little bit as a tribalism theme, and how that community is, how you build a community about certain things, right? And how it is. And it, there's some interesting stuff that's being talked about on many different levels that I don't want to take us down one of those rabbit holes. But I do think that there is more community based around the built environment that we will see, I think, in the future, of how, how communities are actually planned, and how that all is how the whole holistic approach takes place versus some of the disjointedness we see today going on. And I think there'll be more demand in the future for more community based and more, more of that regenerative type based living, if you will. And how that all will take place will be an interesting transformation at some point. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be like hippie communes of the day, right? I don't think it's that idea, but I think there's an idea that is going to be there. It may even be city based, a big city based. Denver's kind of already, in some ways, Denver and Boulder are kind of already making it that way by the building codes, but they could take it a next step on how composting and all, and the mandates on recycling, all those type of things can still be put in there, and you're still making it kind of a tribal based thing, and on how it goes about. I don't necessarily know if it'll be that large of a cities that it can do it, but I definitely think that we may see some smaller cities or just even communities within a city that can make itself into something similar to that.
I agree. Well, again, the built environment of any building or set of buildings is sitting on a piece of land, which is part of a community, whether it's a small city, a large city, or whatever. So how is that going to fit into the community and align with the community context? How is it going to, again, you mentioned a few moments ago, the idea of sort of a building is a one-off project. How can we view this as there kind of is no such thing as a one-off project? How can you put a one-off project in the middle of a community and not have that be an impact on the community? So if you think of it as separate, how does that separation now kind of create a disservice to that community, as opposed to looking at it as an integral part of this community, however you define that, whether you define it in Denver as the Rhino neighborhood or the full city or whatever. And then you can look at things like almost in terms of fractals, right? If you've got a large city like Denver, how can you do something in a particular neighborhood or smaller part of the community that is contextually based to that community, but then sort of take that same framework and apply it to the next and the next and the next, where each of those neighborhoods, each of those sub-communities is really served in the highest way, but it all comes together in the larger context of, say, a metropolitan area.
Yeah. And I am going to throw it out there because I do think I do think there's something there that we will see. And we've talked about this multiple times, and it could be, those smaller communities, from a monetary standpoint, to make it all work, it could all be a crypto based from that community. That is how, monetarily things move within that organization. And I think there'll probably I think at some point we'll see that. I just listened to another podcast about where they were talking about this again. And I think it's an idea that's going to have, at some point, something's going to happen with certain type of things. And I think that's how the tribalism, and I hate using the word tribalism, but it's just how a community based can be contextualized to do certain things in a certain way, and have its own little monetary base that kind of drives certain things to happen if you choose to participate in it, right? There's nothing that says you have to choose to participate in it, but there'll be another framework that'll help. The technology will help make that happen, I think. So,
yeah. Well, you and I have had this conversation before, and I for me, the jury is still out on crypto. I see all these things on such a spectrum. There's such value to the idea of alternative currencies, or community-based currencies. Something that, again, like any technology, how can crypto truly be in service to life, as opposed to, just be, some add-on to the existing structure that's in this world today. If we're building crypto around the idea that, it's just my next way to get rich, then crypto is not going to serve life. If we're building a currency, a cryptocurrency, or any alternative currency that is truly supporting life, truly supporting local communities and thriving and creating greater equity and participation and those kinds of things, then it's fantastic. But I'll come back to what is the consciousness in which we are creating these alternatives?
When somebody is thinking about, bringing in regenerative practices and conscious centered design into their organization, or into or personally into their life, what do you think is the big misconception that people have about those things, that when you start working with them, that they're like, oh, it's kind of not what I was thinking it is? Where do you think people go, oh, this is a little bit different, or are they typically like, oh yeah, it's exactly what I thought? What are your new client? In the first few sessions of working with a new client, what do you think they come away with going, oh, that's a lot different than what I was thinking?
Loaded question. And it varies all the time. I guess it really comes down to, a lot of times when you talk about consciousness or creating consciously, a lot of people, and I've faced this over the years and it's a challenge for me, is how does that not come off as something that's, we'll call woo-woo? How does that become something that is actually grounded and practical, that can make a difference? And one of the things that I strive for, in all of this work, is to link those two. That, again, as I said a little while ago, consciousness really is the basis for all creation. So how do we start there and just be more consciously awake and aware? That doesn't mean that you have to adopt a particular belief system about, higher powers or anything else. What does it mean for each individual person to just be more consciously aware of who they are, the gifts they bring into the world, and what are the structures and the systems and the processes that can really help you to bring that genius and that brilliance that you have into the world, to help contribute to a world that works for everybody. And I think we all want to be there, right? We all want to have that sense of contribution and service. I've talked to very few people in the circles. I probably run in a bubble, and maybe there are people who don't care to contribute in some way to a better world. But I think that at the heart of it, I think everybody wants to be a part of something that creates a better world for all of us. And so maybe that's where it really comes down, in terms of taking this idea of conscious creation and bringing it down into, and combining it with the practical tools, the frameworks, tools, the processes, the systems. It's we were talking just a moment ago about crypto, and something had come up for me, and it may relate here, is that there are transactions, and then there's a sort of a world that it becomes transactional, right? If we're in a world that is purely transactional, it's not in service. There will always be transactions. How do we create the systems and the ways of working together where transactions will occur, but the system itself is not transactional? The system itself is more of a living system, where each part is able to contribute its piece, where each part is recognized, and valued, and there's interdependence within the entire system.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if we think about it, right, if you're a flower and a bee comes by and pollinates, right, that's a transaction, but it's part of a system, right? It's got to work. So
it's part of a living system.
Part of a living system, but there is a transaction that actually happened there. So, so what's your, when most of your clients come to you, where kind of are they at in their career, or businesses come to you? What stage are they at? Are they early? Are they just getting launched, or are they kind of been in business or in a executive position for a while? Where's your clients coming to you from? Where are they at in the process, or is it all over the place?
It does tend to vary a bit. Historically, I've worked, I would say, more with small and medium-sized businesses, and that's probably just a preference of mine. I've been part of large corporations. There's a lot of there's a lot there, in terms of their structures, sometimes politics and things like that. And it is something that I am very open to working with if the organization is really open to looking at things differently. I would love to actually work with larger organizations because, again, some of those larger organizations have a lot to contribute to the world, and they have the, say, the financial strength to help transform, a lot. I would say, regardless of where my clients come from, they all seem to come in a place where I can really see the brilliance that they're bringing into the world. And it's a matter of being able to translate that brilliance into really creating the impact, landing impact in the world, bringing that brilliance into, bringing their true value into the world and being seen and being valued and those kinds of things. So that's where that's where I get my joy from is to work with somebody who's got a real gift to bring into the world, and they've maybe been challenged by whatever those challenges are, and helping them work through those challenges, break through the limitations, the barriers, whatever it is, so that they can begin to really see their impact in the world.
Very good. So kind of just to follow up on that. So as you've kind of honed your consulting, your coaching practice, when you first started out, what do you wish you would have known, right? I mean, so as you've like you said, you've been working with this conscious centered design for 14 years. What do you wish you would have known then when you first started that now?
Wow, that's a big question. I guess, to be honest, Stephen, I guess part of this whole process for me is that there isn't anything, that everything that has occurred has been absolutely perfect in my own learning and experience and my growth. So I can't look back and say, I wish I would have known this, or I wish this could have happened differently, because everything that happened, everything that every experience I've had on this journey has been absolutely perfect to get me to right here. And if that's a message that can be related to by anybody listening to this podcast, I encourage you to think of that life is like a tapestry, right? And in the moment of the weaving, it's often very, very difficult to see what is being woven, right? Because we're right in that weave. But if we can stand back from that a little bit and look at what has been woven over time, if we choose to see the synchronicities, if we choose to see, how things have really come together to bring us to this very moment, it can be a pretty beautiful thing to look at. And that doesn't mean there wasn't, some hardship along the way. Hardship and those kinds of things, I think, is part of our journey as a human, to evolve and to grow and to develop and to bring our gift into the world.
Yeah, for sure. Right. You can always look back, coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Yeah.
It doesn't change anything.
Doesn't change anything. If I can be right here in this moment and choose to sort of carry with me what serves me right now and bringing my highest expression into the world, that's what matters.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So a few closing questions. What is your favorite building and why?
Oh, my favorite building. I got to experience it this past summer. Was the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. I have no idea whether that's a building that I would uh, be jumping up and down about its power consumption or its sustainability record. But from a pure architectural standpoint and the design, it is absolutely incredible. It is a real piece of art.
Very good. What is your favorite place and why?
Oh, my favorite place, nature.
When I said it, I'm like, all right, I kind of know where this is going to go. So anyway.
Yeah, just being connected to nature. I'm a very fortunate person, I think, to live where I live. It's a very beautiful place in Boulder, Colorado, and I can uh, go out on hikes and walks on pretty much a daily basis and appreciate the beauty of this place. But I find myself in other parts of this country or other parts of the world, and as long as I'm in nature, it's beautiful, and it's my favorite place.
And so I know you've done a lot of travel this year. So I kind of, you know, what's the biggest thing what's the biggest experience you had this year that has kind of made you go see something maybe a little bit differently than what maybe you had been looking at it before, right? So just with all your travels and everything, and what has made you go, all right, that's a little different.
I think the biggest difference is not feeling like I have to have a plan for everything. Now, I'm historically, I started my career as a certified public accountant with one of the largest public accounting firms in the world, and my journey to where I am now has been a twisty, turny experience. But I've always that part of me, that part, let's call it details are important, plans are important, and so my experiences this year have really brought me to the point of just being able to be here now, and to allow things to unfold. To kind of hold an intention for how I want to show up in the world, who I want to be, and just allow it to come to me. And yeah, there's still there's a train reservation or a hotel reservation or something that kind of has, but not every single bit of it has to be planned out perfectly. I don't have to have all the answers up front. In fact, it's a whole lot more fun to kind of go with the flow.
I'm with you. I like to travel with not a lot of concrete plans anymore. It's just too many things can happen. You just kind of got to flow with it, right? Weather can change, anything can happen. And if you can just flow with it, it usually works itself out. So
Exactly.
Okay, great. So for someone listening and would like to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Well, my website is beingimaginal.com. Go check out the website, and my email is pretty simple, jason@beingimaginal.com.
All right.
Or connect to me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, for sure. I see you post some stuff on LinkedIn quite regularly lately. So you're a little bit more active on LinkedIn than.
Yeah, my social media is an interesting interesting animal, isn't it? I'm hoping to be more interactive and more active on LinkedIn and sharing some thoughts and just putting maybe some thought provoking things out, as we move forward.
Very good. So thank you, Jason, for taking the time to talk with us today. Really enjoyed the conversation. I think, biggest takeaway, right? That's just the regenerative part of things, and is how people are talking about it is it's becoming more of a buzzword in the built environment. It's really, it really comes back to, looking at things in a nature aspect, right? And then how do we look at that greater, in greater detail? I think the agricultural part of things that we talked about kind of relate all that together. I think there's just too many times we just look at slamming something together and getting it out the door and not understanding the bigger impact of it. And, where's that going to lead us to in the future is kind of interesting. So, I think more people should dive a little bit more into the regenerative part of it and just not understand, what it actually means on a greenwashing part of it, I think. So that we're hearing, but whatever. Thank you to the listeners for taking your time. Listen to Jason and I kind of ramble on a few things. It's always an interesting conversation that goes in multiple different directions. Hopefully you will reach out to Jason or dig a little bit more into the regenerative side of things and how we go about, making better buildings, better societies. I think it's key that we need to think about it. I think it always kills me that when we take a piece of land, we plop a building on it that's just taking life and not giving any life back. And I think that's just from a basic regenerative standpoint, just think about it when you're building something that you are taking a plot of land that's actually produces life and putting something there that's taking life. And so you need to think about that. And does that mean putting on a green roof? What does that mean? I think that's first start in a regenerative thinking about how you do things. So that's my takeaway. Take a look at our website, World Wide Web, dma-eng.com to see this episode. We'll be promoting it. You can look at our blog posts and all the stuff along with that. At some point, I'll be writing a more regenerative. I think I already have one blog post, but I think I'll be writing another one at some point anyways with that. So thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the episode.